Alrighty, I am back. Hope everyone had a good break. Time to go to the bathroom themselves, grab something to eat. Leave myself, got some water, feeling better, good to go. Want to really, compose myself for this kind of thing. It's a lot of talking and a lot of focus. You want to do it right. What was I thinking? So, we have two topics of discussion today. Fairly significant ones. The first is Valentine's Day. That is the first chronologically to come up, which was obviously this past Saturday. What was I thinking? And then we also have just today President's Day. And just trying to get a good video for you guys for each of these. Obviously, I'm going to talk alongside them as well, but just kind of helps to have something visually going on screen, Actually, for some reason, our normal channel doesn't actually have a St. Valentine one. Oh, that should work. Interesting. But we'll just go in chronological order, even though this year President's Day is a little bit more significant, simply because it is the 250th year of our country on an ordinary year. Valentine's Day does take the cake, but 250 years of existing as a country is a pretty significant time to be celebrating and honoring the men who have led it over the course of those 250 years that have kept it going for all their faults and failings. But we're going to start with Valentine's Day. So, Valentine's Day, a good question to start with is, what is love? But I actually, what was I thinking? On one hand, that is the core of the issue. On the other hand, I suppose it really isn't. Or more like, what kind of loves are there, if that makes sense? Because I think an issue we run into a lot nowadays with kind of holidays like this is everyone tends to treat them as though they're just about, everything. Like, oh, Valentine's just about, it's about God's love. It's about, self-love. It's about so on and so forth. Either side of the spectrum. It's really not. At the end of the day, it's like saying that my birthday is a celebration of everyone's birthday. Like, every day is worth celebrating, every human being, but humans can only focus on so many things at a time. So Valentine's Day does really revolve around a specific type of love that, should not be taken away from. Like, frankly, as a single person, I have no business celebrating it for myself. It's not about me. It is about, it's about couples, and that doesn't mean it doesn't involve me. The reason we have these celebrations as a community is because of a rather beautiful fact. And that's kind of what I want to focus on, is the fact that love does affect us all, and that love is important to us all. When one engages, in romance, it's both important for how you choose to engage with it, keep bearing everyone else in mind, but also for everyone else to bear in mind that family is the bedrock of civilization. It's the most basic political unit. It is the thing that life revolves around. And ultimately, life revolves around the union of a man and a woman for the most part. More broadly, it revolves around marriage in general. It revolves around love. It revolves around God's marriage to his church. So God's love is a part of it. And you cannot separate romantic love from that, at least not in a healthy way. But nonetheless, the focus today is on a very specific kind of love. So to give some context as to Valentine's Day, where it comes from, and why I tend to focus on what I focus on, we're gonna go over here and we're gonna play in the background, at the very least, a video on the life of Saint Valentine. We'll do it without audio, I think, this time, just so I can talk over it. So you guys can, because I'll, basically be able to cover it probably quicker than they can, to be honest. So St. Valentine was a Roman Catholic bishop during the early years of the church, and he ends up giving his life as a martyr because he decides to defy a very particular order. That being that one of the emperors at a certain period of time decided to make it illegal for entire, sections of it, an entire legion, I believe. I think it was just one, not like across the empire, but a legion of soldiers prohibited from marrying, with the idea of, if they can't marry, they'll be better soldiers. And I think the remarkable thing about the whole situation to me is that, in the church we do have rules, even back then, where, religious do not marry. So it's interesting to see, that outside of that rule, it is considered such a valuable thing to be able to have, such a valuable right of humanity, and something that the world revolves around. That group of people, it's just a small group of people. It's not everyone or anything. It's just such a fundamental part of human existence that it was a right worth dying for, and standing up to an emperor for, to the point that he basically spent a large portion of his life conducting marriages kind of subvertly, and helping them to get set up so that they could live a married life together, couples, without being caught when they were in this particular situation. And I think it's also remarkable that this is one of the earliest saints of the church. Is that fundamental to human existence, this coupling that we do, that one of the very first things we choose to celebrate is marriage, is romantic love, to be more broadly specific, because it's not just about married couples, but it's about people on that path. Because ultimately, all true romantic love is, in essence, unitive. It seeks to continually drive closer and closer, and marriage is the natural result of that. Love, in the context that we talk about, in all contexts as well, but particularly in this one, I suppose not particularly, but in all contexts, love is sacrificial. Love is committal. Love is unitive, ultimately. Love is procreative. It creates new life. And love, what was I thinking? Shoot, I wrote out the last one here in my thing. What was I thinking? Love is sentimental. That's right. It involves an emotional investment in the people that you choose to care for and choose to bring into your lives. So, what was I thinking? I've been saying that a lot. What can I say? We just did Helldivers for like 2.5 hours, 3 hours, but we're making do. So, what is the point of all this? What have I been trying to get out this whole time? Other than things I've obviously said already. I guess it's essentially that love is important. And that kind of goes for itself. Like, I can go through the list. This fairly speaks for itself, but love requires the willingness to sacrifice for another person, without asking anything particularly in return. And I think that is an often underrated fact. People tend to get into kind of this toxic trap of weighing things one by one, like almost making a spreadsheet in their head. Like, how much has the other person given me in exchange for what I've given them? Now, granted, there is a degree of that in order to be practical. But you have to kind of just like, to make something like that work, any sort of relationship, not just marriage, but particularly marriage and dating, you have to be willing to give without necessarily having something in mind that they're going to give back. It's built on trust. It's funny that, what was I thinking? I guess not funny, but it is such a deep commitment, or it requires so much sacrifice to make that kind of relationship work, that's ultimately, or at least large part of, where that marital covenant comes from. Both a contract with the state and a covenant with God, both upholding the fact that you stay together. It requires that much giving of self over in joining the two hearts together. For one, regarding just the two people at the beginning, is a profoundly unitive thing. It cannot, the more that you spend time on this relationship, the more ultimately that you're going to be, have a part of your heart stored in another person. Your memories, your experiences, who you are, they're going to affect your growth as a person, and you're going to choose to grow in a certain direction because they're over there, and you're going to grow together. And if you're going to do that, that risk, you're taking an awful risk of them pulling out and leaving you high and dry, of you being a type, creating for yourself a type of person that cannot exist without them. A lot of people will tell you that, you have to, in order to go into love, you have to be capable of living without the other person. And to an extent, that's true when you're going into it. It's important that we all ultimately become comfortable with being who we are and with God. And even when you're in that relationship, you need to be able to survive without the other person, at least have a bedrock, again, God. But that doesn't mean you're supposed to be comfortable without them. It's actually precisely the opposite. The goal is, you don't do it with the separation in mind. You're seeking a particular good, and that remarkable good is the power of two human hearts combined, and it's that fulfillment. Some human beings are simply made for that fact. In fact, most human beings are, outside of religious. What was I thinking? Or all human beings outside of religious are, fundamentally. That they are created, not necessarily to a point where they can't be fulfilled on their own, but they know they have a broader potential. They have a second half, so to speak. That if they can combine with, they can reach their full potential. They have to fill their half, and they have to fill the other person's half, and until then, they will have a longing, and they will have a dissatisfaction with their life, and that is only natural, that is proper, and that is healthy. It's a biological fact. Many other species are coupling species, human beings being one of them. We are not a polyamorous species. We are not a polygamous species. Whatever experiments people might want to try, as failed and drastically, dumpster fire of an experiment it has been to try to separate ourselves from that fact, it simply doesn't work. And a part of that goes in as well to this, the commitment comes from the unitive aspect, but also from the procreative act. And that is not simply speaking in terms of creating, literal other human life, although that's one of the most important. The idea of a marriage, and partly why it's so, it was so important to St. Valentine, why it's so deeply connected to the faith, is because it is the very same act, where the human beings take with another, that God took with humanity. And priests who take on that role of Jesus Christ also live, they are marrying themselves, one, to being united, and, the unitive element being united to the work of salvation, to the Savior himself, but then also the procreative act is the work of salvation, is becoming a part of that, is making more souls saved. They devote their lives to that. That is the form of marriage that they undertake. They marry the church as a whole. When an individual marries another, a man and a woman come together, ultimately, the end of that is the creation of more human life. It is simply what it is made for. That is simply the nature of love. It is, it's inseparable from love. If you have true love with another person, you will at some point that that feeling of joy is going to overflow naturally into the creation of other goods, whether it be another human life, whether it be the conversion of salvation of more souls, just simply something good in your life, work of art, so on and so forth. Love is what produces those things. When we are loved, we experience a sensation of gratitude, and we can give back to that person, but it multiplies. We have more than just enough for that and for ourselves. We have enough to put into something else, and if not, that love dies. If that sits around, it decays and it rots like rotten fruit in your heart. You push it all down, decide because you're committed to, for one reason or another, you never a good one, to not going about creating some other good in the world, whether it's out of hatred for other people, out of cynicism regarding life, so on and so forth. We may choose to shove down those desires, and when we do, they rot and, like rotten fruit sitting in a fruit bowl, everything else starts to rot and the relationship ultimately falls apart. And that goes for marriages as much as anything else. In that same context as St. Valentine, the feast for which all of the Valentine celebration is named, the Catholic perspective on marriage is, for one, it's a sacrament that's done between two people, and is, procreation is such a significant part of that is not considered a valid sacrament. It's not actually considered that you are married until you've consummated that marriage. Now, granted, that consummation may not always produce a child, but nonetheless, that is a part of it. And it has to be a procreative act. Is why that is the ultimate purpose of that form of coupling, in the same sense that a priest who has not gone about creating more people has disordered his form of love, the form of gratitude, the way in which love enters his life and joys enter his life. The natural, the best way of putting that joy forward, passing it onward, is a conversion of salvation of souls. If he wanted to do something else, that would also be kind of a distortion, almost as much as shoving it down, not as much and not as quickly corrosive, but still ultimately will often lead to pride and various other things. And the same thing goes for a married couple. That, what the human instinct is for, when it engages in that particular act, is always going to drive it towards the desire to create a child. Hormones are going to be rearranged. Pheromones are going to be exchanged that literally rewire the brains of the two people involved to push them and to also, as a good thing, not just motivate them, but make it better for them when they choose to go down that road, to make their coupling easier. And that procreative act is also a unitive act. The sexual act is something that is fundamental, is essential. It is something required, again, to validate the marriage, and it's something you want to do regularly in the marriage to keep it healthy, is to come together, because it is the deepest form of union that two human beings can have, because they are not just united in spirit, but also in body at that moment. So the entirety of the human person is entirely brought together. It is the most intimate relationship a human being can have with one another. It is essentially a form of what we, with another human being, what Christ has with us in communion to an extent, in the same sense that he comes to us bodily as well as spiritually in the fullness. It is a form of communion that the family unit revolves around, is that particular act. It heals, it unites, and it creates more life. That is what the Eucharist does. That is also what, the fundamental act of marriage does. And like I said, the same principle of being procreative, of drawing forth, does not just apply to creating new life, but to growing in deeper communion with the person that you are with. And that goes both within marriage and outside of marriage as well. It starts even then that gratitude draws for a greater desire to, bring this person deeper into your life, to connect yourself deeper, to understand them more, so that joy can be deeper and more fulfilled. And if you're not growing, you are dying. You can hold out for a while, and we will go through these periods of dryness, and it's important, to not abandon these things when the flame drops. That's what that commitment is for. That's what that contract is for. That's what that covenant is for, with the other person, with the government, and with God. We try as powerfully as possible to unite this union with all of those things, because it takes a village. It takes a village to keep a marriage together. That's why we have St. Valentine's Day. That's why on Valentine's Day, I offer particular prayers, and all Christians are called to offer particular prayers for people in relationships. And also to remember that there are things we can do to help them in their lives. We can help make time for them. As a kid, I can get out of the house when my parents, on Valentine's Day, to give them time with each other, or I can find something else to do, go with the friends, and they have time to go on a date. I could even put some money towards that. We do that for people in these things because they move civilization forward, and they also bring hope to all of us. It's simply a beautiful and wonderful thing to see. When my brother, if in this case Federal and Faith are in a relationship, that's a wonderful and it's a beautiful thing. And I'm extremely happy for them, and the investment that I have made over the course of my life in Federal is getting a return on it. As he goes through those things, by virtue of me having fallen in love with that person, when I see them, entering into this immensely joyous and beautiful and wonderful thing, I get to, reap what I have sown. I get to share in that joy. What was I thinking? And then I'm continually forgetting it. What was the last one? Sentimental. I just put that in there because it's important. You know, that emotional connection is exactly what we're talking about. It's important to remember that love, you know, we say often love is not an emotion as a form of hyperbole, because ultimately, most importantly, is a commitment, is a willing the good of the other. That's all true. But love, even that will is a thing of the heart. You know, it requires sentiment. It requires feeling. You know, love is a feeling, and love is incomplete without a feeling. We have a duty to do work in our hearts. We as human beings can affect our emotions. That's one of the things that makes us sentient, is the fact that we're not just, you know, we're not slave to them. Not only can we rise above them, but we can even change them. We can impact them. And we are called to, you know, move our hearts in the direction of our commitments, and to move our hearts in the connection of the people that we love. We may not like it at the time. We try to find a way to like it, so on and so forth. Love is a sentimental thing, and love requires building up investment in the thing and in the things that remind us of that, of setting up shrines, of setting up things that remind us of the importance of family, of marriage, such as a feast day, such as St. Valentine, such as St. Louis and Zell Martin. You know what? That's a good video. I'll pull that up while I wrap this up here. Oops. Let's see. No, they unfortunately do not have one. I don't remember how to spell her name. There we go. Let this one cook. And we'll let the audio actually go here, and then I will wrap it up with my final words on the subject. What? Oh no. All right, thank you. At least the subtitles have been there. Right, the scene's not done, but bear with me. You know what? It exists in this one. That's rough. There was audio. There's been this music going this whole time.
I have had the happiness of belonging to parents who have no equal. Louis makes my life sweet. He is truly my holy husband.
deep voice within me. He is the one I have prepared for you. He was with me through all the sadness of our lives. And all the joys.
I want to tell you, my dear children, that I have the urgent desire to thank God and to make you thank God. I feel that our family, though very humble, has the honor of being among the most blessed of our adorable Creator.
Soon we will be in our native homeland. Soon the joys of our childhood, the Sunday evenings, our secret conversations, all of this will be given back to us forever, and with interest. Soon.
There we go. Story of a couple of the most important saints in human history because they are the mother and father of one of the greatest saints in human history, a doctor of the church, Saint Therese of Lisieux, and also very much a favorite of a lot of people. What was I thinking? So we'll wrap up time with St. Valentine's Day with talking about what is it all rooted in, right? What does it all come back to? At the end of the day, you tear back the veil and everything, and it is all a refraction of the light of God. It is all meant as a means of seeing Him. They walk hand in hand, the material world and the spiritual world. They're all created by Him. Again, it's this creative act. And one of the holiest, one of the noblest things and most glorious things that any of us can ever be called to is the beauty of becoming what J.R.R. Tolkien would describe as being a co-creator or a sub-creator. God the Father made all of the world, and we are simply a creature within it, but He so loved us that He gave us the ability to, within that world, to create more of it, to create our own worlds and our own imaginations, to create these fantasy and fictional worlds that we play in, but most especially to create that which He considers to be the most valuable, His greatest prize, His greatest possession, and that is us. We can create more human beings. There is, frankly, other than enabling the salvation of those children in which the priests participate, but honestly it goes both ways. Both help both vocations help each other out. There is really nothing higher that one can do in the world other than have a child. One could fight and die in wars across the world. One could found an incredibly successful business. One could make a massive scientific discovery, and none of those things would ever equal the value of a single human being. And we are called to, as Christ continually chooses to love us anew every day, to continue in that mission, to go forth and multiply, to live our lives according to that way and according to that love. Again, Jesus describes very clearly what marriage is in the Bible in saying that He does it Himself. The Christ Himself marries the church. He marries the people, and He tells us when He's talking about marriage specifically, He refers to it as this indissoluble thing, this thing that cannot be broken, and that is a prefigurement. He says that before His death and resurrection, and we get to see how far He is willing to go for us, what exactly it is He has for us when we enter into that kind of relationship with another human being. The level of sacrifice, that level of love is the same level of love that He expects of us, and it's also the same level of love that He gives us to uphold that commitment, and is also a reminder of just how committed He is to us. In the same way, He tells us that we are in it for life, we're in it for good. When we make that commitment, He says that He is in it for good with us in so doing. Now, obviously, St. Paul goes through, what the calling is of, a husband and wife and a child, the calling of a man, where, each though each is ultimately called to every role to an extent. Like we focus on Valentine's Day with particularly on relationships versus other kind of focuses. Different people within a relationship have different focuses. For the man, it is laying down his entire life for the woman. It is choosing to decide where he works based on her desires, to decide where he lives based on her desires, to decide all these things, to give the entirety of his life over to the good of the family, to lay down his life, literally, if necessary, for the family that he is entering into. For the woman, it is to uphold and support and to trust and to obey the man in that position in order to enable him to do it successfully without hindrance, without getting, without there being disagreement and discord that gets in the way of such things. And then for the child, it is complete obedience and fidelity to both. And to also fathers to children, fathers do not antagonize your children, and then to children vice versa, to respect and obey and to honor thy father and mother at all times. And I think it's a remarkable thing that ends up being in the commandments, more so than you think of all these things that the world revolves around. It revolves around do not murder, it revolves around do not commit adultery, it revolves around theft, all of these things that seem to us naturally, as at least to an extent naturally, as capital offenses. In there is the honor of thy father and thy mother. At that very moment, in the very beginning, that early on, is it established just so important. I mean, even earlier than that, in the sense that Abraham is declared descendants of Abraham. Why just, why descendants? Why not just people Abraham happens to evangelize to, and then to the people of Israel, and then later broadly to the whole world through adoption? But all of it is family. None of it is done without family. There's not a single sense of conversion in the entire history of the Christian religion that involves non-familial bonds. It simply does not happen. That is how important family is. Family is complete loyalty. Family is something that has been the bedrock for human civilization for the entirety of its existence. In later days, unfortunately, we're trying this and failing at this experiment of breaking that up continually and messing with it and all sorts of other various things, adding more people into it, choosing to not do it at all, changing the conditions of it, so on and so forth. For also on the kids side, not only do those things negatively impact the kids, which is also another reason for the committal aspect of marriage, as well as any relationship, is that commitment protects the work that is being created. It's all procreative. If you go through the act of creating a child, if you're a priest and you're working on the conversion of a sinner in a parish, or just working for the greater good of the parish, and you bail, that has a negative impact on the people that you committed to. They were only there because you were there, and they needed you. In the same way that a husband and wife, when they come together, they invest in each other, and a massive loss that cannot be gotten back occurs when that thing is broken up. The same thing goes for the children to the parents. The entirety of their lives, even though they're not called to obedience, the entirety of their lives, they're called to the honoring of their father and their mother, to providing for their needs, to bringing respect to their good name. Honor is a particular thing. It is not just a broad concept. It's not just doing greater good. It is literally bringing glory to that family. It is seeking to uphold the things that were valuable to your parents, to preserve them, to preserve the businesses that they love, to preserve the places that they love, the cities that they love. We live in a world where we go and we just shotgun our progeny off into the world. You go to college in California, and you go to college in Florida, and then you move to Europe, so on and so forth. And it's destroyed. And by virtue of that, we wonder why we don't have vibrant cultures or anything else in the West anymore. It is not only because of all the other things people blame it on, but largely it's because no one stays around long enough for it to exist. Frankly, you can't have a city culture. You can't have vibrant, bustling cities and new dishes and stuff created. All those things that not just come out of countries, they came out of cities. Italy, one of the most prolific places with culture and so on and so forth that we often tend to think of in the West, used to just be a bunch of warring city-states. And to this day, there's still a boatload of Italian dialects, because they can't necessarily agree on what the language even is, and because they're so invested in those particular cultures, and people choose to stay there and live there. Obviously, it's breaking down to this day, unfortunately. But the point of it is that children have a responsibility to their families. And that family, that level of investment is required for something sacred. It's required for the bonds of faith. It is required for the bonds of love, so on and so forth. And so we have this great encouragement that Christ marries his church, and we have this great calling in the fact that we are called to that same level of commitment and investment that is lifelong, that we can't escape. We're also reminded of the joy that awaits in the same form of the resurrection in heaven. That joy awaits for us when we go about building the kingdom of heaven on earth, and we are called to continually do it. Don't just stop as a priest at one conversion. Don't just stop as a family at one child. You go for as much as you can. You go for broke, because that is the good for which we exist. We exist. All these things that we talk about do not exist to prevent evil, strictly. They do prevent evil. Evil is a bad thing, but evil fills the vacuum of good. We are called ultimately, at all times, to create new good. And so we choose to do that with each other. On Valentine's Day, we particularly remember marital couples, and not just not even the family. It's not even the kids involved here. We talked a lot about that, but it's primarily about the relationship with those two people. Even within a family, where do children learn love from? Where they learn all their things from? It is how the mother and the father treat each other. They learn the different forms of relationship. They learn different forms of interaction. They learn the different forms of people. Men and women are very different. There is no greater diversity in the world. A white man and an Aborigine man on the totally opposite side of the world have more in common than a white man and a white woman. It is simply how it goes. You know, the person from an entirely different culture, entirely different race, entirely different backgrounds. There is so much different between those two, essentially subspecies of human being, that we learn that from the family. We learn how to interact with those people. We learn how to be outgoing. We learn what care looks like. We learn what sacrifice looks like. We learn what commitment looks like from our parents. And therein, so more so than the relationship from parent to child, is even more important the relationship from parent to parent, and as well from boyfriend to girlfriend, because they're going there, they're getting there, they're creating this bedrock of civilization. They're this bright, beautiful, shining joy to the rest of us. I don't have a relationship in my life. I would love to have one, but I don't. And so I can just watch, I can either choose to be envious, or I can choose to watch and to enjoy what other people have. And they give us that bright light. Hopefully we can all latch on to it. I'm going to stop talking because I've been going for a long time, but it's a very deep subject, and that's what happens when I am forced to talk about something after 3 hours of burning my brains out on Cyberstan. So we end with a prayer. May God bless and keep all couples, bless and keep all marriages, bless and keep all families. We implore your blessing upon them, and give them the grace, give them the strength to love when they do not immediately receive love. Give them the strength and the wisdom to choose to commit to one another. Give them the trust and make them worthy of that trust with one another. Uphold them, fill their lives with love and with the joy necessary. Be their anchor for them in those tough moments in which they aren't getting what they need from the other person, and that they may instead get it from you, and that this beautiful bastion of civilization you've given us may be upheld, may keep us afloat, may continue to bring more life into the world, and bring more joy and beauty and especially into the lives of those who do it. And we give thanks for them. We give thanks for people who choose to go down this path, because they do not just do it for themselves, but they do it for all of us, knowingly or unknowingly. They're a great gift to the world, and so we pray for them a special way. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. If you have nothing else to do to think of your marriage, just think of those words. Honestly, pray, think through the Our Father. All those things are going to be the bedrock of any relationship. Alrighty. On a President's Day. We're going to let this guy talk for a minute. I know nothing about him. I just tried to look up a good video. And we'll let him cook, and while I get myself mentally and emotionally ready to talk about another important subject.
Third Monday in February, we celebrate President's Day. For many years, this holiday was celebrated differently from state to state and didn't become an official federal holiday until 1885. In order to really understand the origins of President's Day, though, we have to go back to the very first president, George Washington. Washington died on December 14, 1799, at the age of 67, and almost immediately upon his death, Americans began calling for a day to honor Washington, who had led the nation through the American Revolution, had been a leader of writing the Constitution, and of course was the first president. So on February 22nd, which was Washington's birthday, people began having celebrations to honor him. So in the early 1800s, there was no official holiday, but as the century continued, more people called for Washington's birthday to be recognized, especially in 1832, which would have been Washington's 100th birthday, and then a few years later in 1848, construction was begun on the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C. So again, there were calls for a national holiday, but it wouldn't be until after the American Civil War that an official call for a federal holiday came. In the late 1870s, a senator from Arkansas named Stephen Wallace Dorsey proposed a bill to make Washington's birthday a federal holiday. The bill was passed through Congress, and in 1879, President Rutherford B. Hayes signed it into law. Now, initially, the holiday was only celebrated in the District of Columbia or Washington, D.C., but in 1885, it was expanded to the entire nation. The holiday, of course, was not called President's Day, it was simply Washington's birthday. And whatever day of the week February 22nd fell on, that was the holiday, and it remained that way for almost 100 years. It wasn't until the late 1960s that there came a change to Washington's birthday celebration. Senator Robert McClory of Illinois pushed for what was called the Uniformed Holiday Act. The idea was to take holidays that fell on random days of the week and push them to Mondays so that Americans would have a 3-day weekend. This had a lot of support from workers and labor unions, but it also had a lot of support from retailers as they saw a 3-day weekend as an opportunity to make more money. And just think about today, how many President's Day sales we see each year. But now as the debate went on in Congress, some began to argue that we had another famous president's birthday in February, Abraham Lincoln. February 12, 1809 was Lincoln's birthday, and with Illinois Senator McClory leading the charge for this law, and Illinois being the land of Lincoln where they were already having celebrations for his birthday, now the idea came, if we move the holiday away from Washington's actual birthday of February 22nd and just made it a Monday, then why not just put Lincoln in there too and call it President's Day? So in 1968, the Uniform Holiday Act was passed, and it went into effect in 1971 following an executive order from President Richard Nixon. Now, President's Day would be on the third Monday in February, but also in the act, Columbus Day, Memorial Day, and Veterans Day were all moved to Mondays. Today, there is some debate of what President's Day actually is meant for. Is it supposed to be for all presidents, or is it supposed to be just about Washington and Lincoln? Some argue that by honoring all presidents, the holiday is somewhat cheapened, but however you want to celebrate the holiday, just take a moment and appreciate the democracy that we have and the system we have of electing new leaders every few years. So with that, hopefully you learned something, and thanks for watching.
Very good. What was I thinking? So just we talked about how important it is, the family unit and the marital unit. What was I thinking? And how essential it is that, also it's something I didn't really, I guess, quite get into, is that it's an imperative to not just, it's not just about creating new life, it's about raising up that new life. So you don't just, make a child, you don't just give birth to a child, you have to raise a child, you have to instill it. And I thought of that because there's literally a quote here. What was I thinking? Where is it? A quote here from, this one is from Ronald Reagan. Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in our bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. I think a lot of people are very fed up in the world right now with how much the last few generations have not considered the generations following them, and the way that they live their lives. We look at the housing crisis, we look at all of this, a lot due to the greed of generations before us wanting their retirement to be the best thing in the world and not honestly caring that much about what happens, expecting us to just go and follow that same path that they took, even though that path for one is vastly different now, and the world is vastly different because the world that they did all these things in did not just exist, it was created, and that required a lifetime of work, and they weren't quite willing to do that. And it's imperative that we do. It's imperative that we rise up to recreate those goods in the world, and to never stop fighting for them. Now, on this day, we celebrate some of the men who've been responsible for leading that charge. I think it's both, it's both a funny thing, but honestly somewhat of an intentional thing more than some might think, that the president is as important as he is. To an extent, he is just a third of government, but to another extent, there are many. John Adams, a early president and one of the most significant founding fathers, even considered giving the office of even though it would still be democratically elected, the office of the presidency, the title His Majesty. It was always considered to be fairly a significant a rule that led the people more broadly than the rest, while as Congress enacted laws and decided what could and could not be done and handed out money. For the most part, the face that people knew and the mouth through which words of encouragement or direction were spoken to them at the highest level came through the President of the United States. And so they both have that role, as well as the role that they were designed to have in the Constitution, which is as chief executive, carrying out the will of Congress, the representatives of the people. And that is, of course, a very difficult job. One of the early founding fathers, I think it was actually Adams, funnily enough, who said that no one who actually understood the pressures that would be involved in the office of the presidency would ever actually run for it. Now, granted, that's a little bit of a hyperbole, but it is a very demanding thing. As we were talking about the relationship in the family unit, of the woman to the man, of support and of encouragement, of love, of loyalty, fidelity, so on and so forth, and how we owe those same feelings towards Jesus' representatives on earth, towards the priests, towards the church, and the church towards God. We also owe those same things towards our leaders, even if they're not great, even if they're not doing precisely what we want them to, because it's a very difficult job. It is a job that requires celebration, and it requires upliftment, and that requires acknowledgement, that requires prayer, most especially, that requires devotion, that requires loyalty, goodwill. We have all these traditions that we tend to forget nowadays because we kind of just, thrown everything out the window because we're lost and we don't really know where to go from here. But there used to be a massive set of manners, that would define how we acted towards certain people and the level of respect that we would treat them with. And we did not just give these things out, simply because of class or of power, but because to do that kind of role, to take on that kind of burden, is to take on a more difficult burden than most will take on in their life. And so therefore they will need more support, more encouragement, and more love. And I think it's a very difficult thing, especially nowadays, and how controversial things can be. We are in one of the most controversial and difficult times in our country, in the United States, at all levels of government, to be faithful to these things, to care about the feelings of the people who are in office. But ultimately, as we talked about the other thing in St. Valentine's Day, the heart governs the will, and the goodness that you do to that heart will win people over. It is, in fact, the most effective form of persuasion in human existence. It's not logos, it's not ethos, it is pathos. It's the thing people listen to ultimately the most. Whether you consider that a good thing or a bad thing, at the end of the day, love is what drives people to want to do something. And so we treat these people with a particular amount of respect and of care, because they deserve it, frankly. They've chosen to do something very difficult. Granted, it has gone way downhill in the terms of it being just a sacrifice. You get a lot more out of it than you used to. You're set for life, book deals, and massive salary, and so on and so forth. But you get the idea, especially at the early days. I want to go back to the story of George Washington, which sets the spirit of the presidency for all generations to come. Really, when it comes to any particular role, the first person to hold the role always sets the precedent of what the ideals are. The second person sets the precedent of the practical, how this thing actually is entailed, because you get the ideal and then you have the next person come in and you see how practical it is to live up to that ideal. And then usually that's your baseline for how a system operates. So in that case, but when it comes to the ideal, we are looking at George Washington, and he is a very particular man who did not have those great many blessings, and himself chose to step down after only 8 years in the office, an office which originally did not have term limits. He could have kept going. At the end of the war, he could have declared himself king. The very king that he fought against, King George, was recorded as saying that if at the end of this war, George Washington resigns his commission instead of using it to assume power or to hold on to power or to gain the power of a kingship, he will be the greatest man in the world at that time. And that is exactly what he did. That is the character of the United States. I think we tend to get caught up, super Earth and liberty and all these things as being the defining aspect of the United States, but all those things are only to enable one particular thing, and that is the kind of character that existed within men like George Washington, that existed within men like John Adams, that existed within the various founding fathers. Granted, none of them were perfect people. They didn't create a perfect system of government. They didn't live perfect lives. They didn't have perfect foresight, but they were generally good men who did remarkably incredible things and unprecedented things for the time. George Washington, first and foremost among them. There's a reason he's on the court. There's a reason he's one of the most represented. We don't know who the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is, most of us. We don't know who the first Speaker of the House we don't know we don't know who the first Senate Majority Leader was. We don't know who the first pro tempore was. We don't know who the first Vice President was. None of the above. We just know Washington, because at the day and age, the human tendency is to rally around one person. It's simply easier, and so we rally around the president. And he led that role. He lived that role with an incredible amount of integrity, with an incredible amount of goodwill towards his political rivals, towards the people that he ruled, towards people who tried to rebel, towards the other nations in the world, with forgiveness, with dignity, with respect, with care, and ultimately with humility, which to the latest generations has been remarked as being the most essential aspect for a successful presidency, is to understand that one is no better than the people that they seek to govern, and that one is no more than, when one thinks of being on the highest, the highest rung on the ladder, to not think of themselves as being superior to every ladder, rung below them, but simply it being a job, and like any other job. It is not necessarily, it's no, a plumber has a trade, a leader has the trade of being a leader, and they consider themselves to be equal things. And that's how Washington carried himself. It's how he considered the rest of the citizenry, and it's why he felt it so important to set the precedent stepping down early. Whether you agree with it or not, whether you wish that we had just gone and had a king from the beginning, you tire of the continual back and forth, pendulum and political processes of the world, all that's very understandable, but nonetheless, it was an incredibly principled thing to do. And over the generations, we have had a great many presidents. I think we're at 46 or 47 now. Over the 250 years of America's existence, who have led us through incredible trials. We have gone through another war with England. We have gone through wars with our neighbors in Mexico. We have gone through wars against ourselves. The Civil War, probably the greatest crisis the nation ever faced. Abraham Lincoln brought us through that. We went through World War I. We went through World War II, which is much bigger, for us than World War I was, and many other trials and tribulations over the centuries. And again, when we think of these things, we often think of them as defined by a president, which again is a lot of pressure for one human being. He's one branch of the government, and he's not the only person in that branch. And we really tend to just think of them. We tend to just think of Lincoln, and the weight of solving, ending the Civil War was ultimately on his shoulders. Congress could do some things and the courts could do some things, but ultimately it's mostly up to Lincoln to rally them to do such things. Like we were back in the days of the Roman Republic, and the council is, trying to whip the Senate into order. These are the men who have ultimately led us over the course of civilization. Whether you love them or hate them, the country still exists. There have been many that I hate. There have been many that I would put very low on the totem pole of not just United States leaders, but of leaders throughout history. But one thing you can say about all of them is that we're still here. As damaged and as broken and tattered and ragged of a flag we may have at any particular given time, we still share a same language. We still share a same culture. We still have a sense of goodwill towards our neighbor. We still want what's best for the country. We still want to stay together, despite all the terrible things. Think of the things that we debate about nowadays. Those weren't on the table. Those were not things, the disagreements we have today between Democrats and Republicans are far more drastic than the disagreements the United States had with the Kingdom of Britain. It is far greater than the disagreements that the North had with the South. It is far greater than the disagreements that we had with Nazi Germany in World War II or Japan. The interior divisions of today are some of the most severe that have ever existed And yet, those men over those 47 years, of course, not just them, but those 47 or so men have cultivated a culture that wants to stay together. And that's an incredible and remarkable thing. So we pray for them no matter what they do. We care about them no matter what we do. We care about their health. We care about their well-being. We don't talk excessively bad about them. We don't gossip about them. We don't deride them. At least we shouldn't. That's one thing I particularly hate about American politics, is the fact that we have no decorum or class when we talk about our leaders. Granted, if it's already out the window, you may as well, fight fire with fire. I agree with that approach. But generally speaking, we ultimately want to care about these people. And even if we don't always, it doesn't always look at, sometimes we do it by slinging mud, we still do it out of a place of care and respect for these people and for the offices that they hold and the sacrifices that they have to make, even especially the ones that are unseen. And so today, cheers to all of them. May God bless and keep them all. Grant grace and mercy and forgiveness and eternal joy to those who have already passed, wisdom, fortitude, and courage among all of your other blessings to the man who currently sits in the office, to President Donald Trump, and to all those who will future hold the office. We pray that there will be an office in the future. In Jesus' name, in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. May God bless and keep them all. And thank you for all of them. All authority comes from God. At the end of the day, authority is a sacred thing. We've always considered it sacred. The same reason that marriage is sacred is because once you become so intertwined with a group of people, there is, to an extent, no going back. Or if there is, it's a very messy one. They're outside of all the other principled arguments to fight for the North in the Civil War. One would simply be the fact that the taxes of someone from New York, their livelihood, has gone to Texas. Has gone to Tennessee, has gone to Virginia. There is no taking that back. If you just walk away from the table now, you're tearing off their livelihood. They didn't give you it for that. You make those commitments to those people, and it's worth upholding. And that's why we respect authority, even when we don't always agree with it. If it is not totally abhorrent, if it's not totally wrong, we have always recognized, unfortunately we don't as much nowadays, and unfortunately I think it's a toxic thing in the United States, how sometimes libertarian or liberal, whatever you want to call it, how loosey-goosey we are with following the rules and with respect for authority. Is somewhat of a toxic thing. The idea that we don't just agree because someone told us so. But honestly, that's all that's, you say to a child is what should be said to a citizen. Is all that matters, is that you were told so. And you do it because that is better than the chaos that erupts when you don't. Granted, again, we live in very particular times, and I know we have, there are all sorts of nuances and exceptions and so on and so forth, and, unspoken rules that aren't necessarily written in law, so on and so forth, but you get the idea. It is worth sticking by your commitments. We need to, we ought to, and we have to do with goodwill and good words and charity and respect and love and cheers. I already cheered. Now I'm just going to take my pills and do some gaming. This is a fun song to come back to. What was I thinking? All right. No one else has piped up about anything. So I think we're just going back to Cyberstan. I will give you guys food for thought. I do my best. Sometimes it's too rambly. I'm working on it. It's not a podcast at the end of the day. It's a halftime show. And the point of a halftime show is that the athletes can rest. And that's not what I do. I'm not worried about it. That came out well. I appreciate y'all's patience. Just poured an energy drink into my water. Rosary. Let's do level 8. Not quite ready for level 9 yet.
Mission coordinates locked.
Let's do what we can.
Pods prime.
Hope we get some assistance. I think we should. This is where everyone is right now. That's how it is in the area.
Orbit synchronized. Launch initiated.
I'm excited to move in with Gibbon because one of the things, or for many reasons, but one of the things I'm excited for, the reason I bring it up now, is that I will be able to prepare those things in advance. We will be doing podcasts and things, and we'll have a better setup and more support. I have a writing desk, so I won't just be like going in with ideas and trying to string together the sentences in real time. Like a proper script. I can just relax. I think a big part of why I rush through these things is because I'm anxious to get back to stuff.